Well, welcome back to Financial Accounting and Analysis. The video recording system that I usually use on Canvas is down for the count today. So I'm recording this on my personal Zoom account. So hopefully everything will work well. It may look a little bit different, but that's the explanation for those of you who are curious. But the purpose remains the same. It's to review the homework from Chapter 4. At this point, you have already received your individual feedback. I've posted the solutions and the slides that you're looking at, or will be looking at over the next 20 minutes. Those are posted for you as well. And even if you did well, I would encourage you to view this video and the slides and so forth, because there are lessons learned here that will help you on the upcoming midterm, the upcoming final, and also on your SMAC as well. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. There's a man beating a dead horse, because these are some things that I've said before, which I continue to say. So that if you ever hear that expression, we're beating a dead horse, means you're repeating something that you've said over and over again. So before we get to the dead horse, the discussion grades were good. The assignment grades were pretty actually good. Anytime the assignment grades get near 90, when I say assignments, those are the exercises and the problems. Anytime they get near 90, that's a good stage. The issue that we've got, some of you are still not answering all the questions that are posted in the homework briefing. Also, when you compute ratios, there are many different ways that these ratios are computed. I want you to use, and I've said this a couple of times now, but notice I added an exclamation point for emphasis here. The back of your text, Appendix B, is all the ratios that we've introduced so far together with the ones that we'll introduce throughout the remainder of the semester. And when you do homework and you do exams and stuff like that, and you do your SMAC, use the ratios as they are described in Appendix B. So, if there's a question of whether you average the assets or you average something or not, don't use your own judgment. Don't do what you've done previously. Make sure you use the format and the formula that's in Appendix B. And when you answer the questions in the homework briefing in the order they're posed as well. I had to do kind of a little bit of hieroglyphics here, where some of you, I didn't hold it against you this time, but and if I asked you to do solvency ratios first and you did liquidity first and profitability last, it kind of made my life more difficult. So answer the questions in the order that they are posed. Keep up the interaction with your classmates. Very good. Matthew, Lukendi, and Charles were good examples this week. And I really like Charles. I hope you don't mind me calling you out, but Charles missed a major point in his original answer, but he recognized that major point he redeemed himself in his interaction with his colleagues. So there's always to your benefit for many reasons to have good, thoughtful interaction with colleagues. And thank you, Matthew, Lukendi, and Charles, for good interaction this week. You continue to learn from your classmates, which is good. Where the biggest overall comment here, a lot of ratio analysis here. So you want to make sure that you're concise and you're well presented results of your analysis. So summary tables at the top. If you're doing ratios for 2 years, show the ratios, what you computed for each of the 2 years. Put them side by side. Don't make a long narrative. Then follow that with your calculations. So a couple of you did not include calculations. Going forward, you have to include calculations. So I'll start to take points off next time around if you don't show your calculations. And the reason for the calculations, it shows me that you didn't just, not that you would consider this copy off of someone else. And also, you see if you made an error, you can see where you made your error. If you don't show your calculations, I can't tell you where you screwed up if you made an error. Also, you see the summary tables followed by your calculations, what the trends are telling you. Liquidity is up, solvency is down, profitability is up. So you need to be able to, you can't really comment on what it's going unless you actually, the next thing, you need at least 2 years. So in most of these homework that were assigned, you had 2 years worth of data. So I expected to see 2 years worth of ratio. So you couldn't get full credit if you just focused in on 1 year, nor could you find out what the trend were at each of the areas you focused on with just looking at 1 year. You got to compare 1 year to the next. And also, if it's a good ratio, you can't just say it's a good ratio based on a comparison of 2 years. You got to compare it to another company in the same field. So when you're looking at other comparisons that you can do. So if you're looking at a drug company, whether it's Bristol Myers or you're looking at an aircraft manufacturer, whether it's Boeing, you need to be able to compare Bristol Myers to, say, Novartis or some other drug company. And you've got to be able to compare Boeing to Airbus or some other aircraft manufacturer. So that's what we need by doing benchmarking. You compare your company to other companies in the same industry. Again, beating the dead horse on the exercise and the problems and the exercises here. So again, concise summary, see the way that's modeled in the solutions that I'll call up when I get done with my general overview. So you get summary tables followed by calculations, what the trends are telling us. There are good examples in your text. So take a look at Exhibit 4.6 on page 140. And as I mentioned, Appendix B should be your cookbook for doing all your ratios. You got to use the formulas that are in 524, Appendix B. Again, you need 2 years to get a trend, show your calculations, and if possible, show some industry benchmarks. And you got to answer all the questions in the homework briefing. So a couple of you didn't answer all the ratios, or you did them in the wrong order. And you need to have conclusions for each area. So if you're looking at liquidity and you're looking at solvency, you're looking at profitability, what trends do you see in each of those areas? Then what your overall conclusion is. And then when you're asked, what are some other comparisons you could do? You could do some other type of benchmarking, other companies in the same industry. All right, the discussion, first of all, we had the discussion question 4.2. So this is how to use financial leverage effectively. So there was a very useful slide here, slide 39. You got the slides from all my lectures there. So go call up the slide 39 for this chapter. And that's a very good slide in terms of explaining leverage. And in general, these are the type of things you should have included in your answer. The use of leverage, debt financing, will benefit the company as long as the rate earned on assets exceeds the rate on borrowing. So as long as you're earning on the assets a higher rate of return on the after tax cost of borrowing, then the company benefits. Some of you didn't answer this question. When should a company stop borrowing? Well, when its after-tax cost of debt approaches or becomes equal to the ROA. So once you lose that spread between the return on assets and the return on the cost of debt, then leverage ceases to be effective. So you can continue to borrow up until such point as the after-tax cost of debt is equal to the ROA. And if you continue, if the cost of debt exceeds the ROA, it actually brings down the rate on equity. Right? Debt financing will produce the greatest returns when the spread between the cost of debt and the ROA is large, and it'll have the least benefit when it's small. And you can decompose, that's a lovely term, it's going to decompose a return on assets into return on sales and asset turnover here. So leverage will be most effective when the return on sales is high, and leverage will be most effective when the asset turnover is high, just the opposite if it's low. So when a firm is able to leverage effectively, its return on equity will exceed its return on assets. So you actually, the fact that you're getting a kind of a super rate of return on assets if you're using leverage effectively, because the return on equity, the rate earned by the common stockholders, will be larger than the return on assets as a result of the financial leverage. And by the way, be careful how you compute financial leverage. Financial leverage in this course is the assets divided by the stockholders' equity. Some of you had some model definitions of what financial leverage is. And again, when in doubt on the formula for any of the ratios, consult Appendix B. All right. So to get full credit for question 4.2, those are the things I should have seen in your response. For exercise 4.12, you had to do a bunch of ratios here for Bristol Myers Squibb. And when you did the return on assets, it was levered, which means you didn't have to add back the tax effect of the interest expense. And what the question that many of you didn't answer here is, how do you know what other comparisons would you want to do? You want to compare this company to other drug companies. And then you got to comment on the trends. You got to show 2 years and you need to comment on the trends. And I'll pull up the detailed solutions in a moment on that. For 4.17, analyzing financial risk, don't overreact if the ratio of cash and marketable securities to assets is low. Some of you got all upset about that. That's it's just with particularly with interest rates being very low, that ratio, as long as the company is able to pay its bills and its other liquidity ratios look good, I wouldn't be overly concerned about that ratio being. Make sure you understand the interest coverage ratio. That's the cushion that we have to provide for the payment of interest. So the larger that number is, the better we are doing. That gives us, the larger that is, the more profits we have available to pay interest. And again, you needed to comment on the trends. I didn't ask the question in 417, what are other benchmarks that you could do? I did ask that again in the last question, which was 427. So one of the things you should have noted is that very low stockholders' equity at Boeing, and that was as a result of a large buyback of stock. So that's why the stockholders' equity was so low. ROA was unlevered, so when you did the return on assets, you had to add back the tax effect of the interest expense. Which I'll remind you how to do that when we pull up the detailed solutions. As far as how the company had very high profitability, and they also, even with all the debt, they had an increase in interest coverage, which was positive. Again, you needed to show 2 years. Some of you only did 1 year. You got to comment on the trends. And got to remember, Boeing is the world leader in aircraft manufacturing. So that was something you probably want to mention in your analysis there. So yes, they were highly leveraged, but they also were very profitable as well. So that didn't necessarily mean that Boeing was a bad investment because they were highly leveraged. And remember, the ratios are different for each industry. So if you're comparing Boeing to other companies, you want to compare Boeing to companies in the same industry. So there's the high level stuff. Let's get to the more detailed level stuff. So you're going to see a pattern here. So I may sound a little bit pedantic here, but this is what I want you to do. When you compute ratios, do the side-by-side comparison of the 2 years you're looking at. And look how pithy and how insightful this is. So just by inspection, I can look at that and I can say, yeah, return on equity is up, return on assets is up significantly, return on sales is up significantly, asset turnover is up a little bit, and financial leverage actually is down a little bit, which means that they're less. They have less debt in the capital structure relative to earnings, so they've actually improved their solvency. So in all these examples, do the table side-by-side comparison first, then show your calculations. So where did these numbers come from? Well, you can see here how they're calculated. So I gave you the ratio, I gave you the formula. Here's how they're calculated for each year. These ones were all pretty much straightforward. I don't think you had any add backs or subtractions you had to do. And then overall, what did I tell you? Well, the profitability is up a lot. They had an increase in ROE, ROA, and ROS. Financial leverage has declined a little bit, so they're actually less reliant upon the debt. The asset management ratios have improved slightly. Asset turnover is up slightly. The company appears to be overall a good investment given what we set up above in the ratios. However, you need to benchmark them to other companies in the same industry, which would be pharmaceuticals. 417, here you were looking at liquidity and you were looking at solvency. So here was a case where some of you didn't answer all the ratios. So I wanted 3 liquidity ratios: cash and marketable securities to assets, quick ratio, and current ratio. Some of you got confused and assumed that the cash and marketable securities to assets was the same ratio as the current ratio. It's not, they're different ratios. So if I ask for these 3 ratios, then I expect to see calculations of those 3 ratios. This is why I recommend you print out the slides that we use in the homework briefing, and you use that as a checklist to make sure you've answered all the questions. And then you've got the solvency ratios. These were the solvency ratios I wanted you to calculate: long-term debt to total assets, long-term debt to stockholders' equity, and interest coverage. So what you can see here is the quick ratio is up, the current ratio is up, the cash market securities is down a very, very small amount. So liquidity overall is up. Solvency looks pretty much about the same as far as long-term debt to assets and long-term debt to stockholders' equity. They're within a point here, so those are very close. But your interest coverage, the cushion you have out of earnings to pay interest actually is up, and that's a significant increase. Now, where people made mistakes here, they made mistakes in how we calculated the quick ratio. You made mistakes in when you did the solvency ratios. You got to remember that the long-term debt includes both the long-term debt and the current portion of long-term debt. So those are so some of you who got the wrong solvency stuff forgot to add back the current portion of the long-term debt to get your ratios. Now again, see the advantage. Here's the number that you got when you computed the ratio, and then here is how the ratio was computed. So it makes it easy for you and me to see if we made a mistake, where we made it. And then what if we said it with the company overall? Well, marketable securities declined somewhat, but you did have an increase in the quick ratio and the current ratio, which indicates the overall increase in liquidity. The solvency, the use of debt financing based on the long-term debt to assets and long-term debt to stockholders' equity is pretty much the same, but the interest coverage did improve, which shows that you had an increase in solvency. So notice ratios, calculations, and then what do the ratios tell you? What the ratios tell you is the most important part. What used to really annoy me in the past, and then I have to say you guys are pretty good at this. People will go through all the ratios and then they won't comment on them. You guys are pretty used to commenting on the ratios, so keep up the good work. Okay, the last one was the Boeing, and here this is a very I almost said tedious. It's got a lot of ratios, and to get full credit, if I ask for all these ratios, you got to compute all these ratios. And I highlighted in yellow the profitability because the profitability was so high. So these were the ratios that were asked for. So return on stockholders' equity, return on assets unlevered. So we have a little add back that we had to do there for the interest, and I'll show you what that was. Return on sales, gross profit margins. You can see everything is up. So all of the profitability measures are up. Asset management, some are receivables turnover is down. Receivables collection period, it takes us longer to collect our bills. Inventory turnover is up marginally. Inventory on hand was down a little bit, which is mostly a positive thing. And asset turnover was up. Okay, so you can see the advantage of just putting them side by side. As far as liquidity, the ratio of cash and marketable securities to total assets is down. Quick ratio is down. Current ratio is down. So there's been a decline in solvency. Long-term debt to assets. So long-term debt to assets increased from 0.8 to 0.10. Long-term debt to stockholders' equity. Hello, this is a huge increase. And the reason there's a huge increase is they had a major buyback. So long-term debt to stockholders' equity, comparing long-term debt to stockholders' equity, stockholders' equity goes down significantly as a result of them purchasing back a lot of their stock. That's why you got a big swing in that ratio. But interest coverage ratio went down, but it's still pretty hefty there at 25. So my overall analysis is that profitability is up, asset management is mixed, liquidity is down, solvency is down. But overall, the company looks to be a reasonably good investment based on the profitability of the company. But you really can't say overall in terms of how they're doing until you compare them to other companies in the same industry. So here were quite a few ratios. Here were the analysis of the ratios. And then I showed you here the computation. So here's how we said the return on assets was unlevered. So you have to take the net income and you've got to add back the tax affected interest expense. So remember, when you add back the interest expense, you got to subtract out, got to multiply that by 1 minus the tax rate. So the interest actually reduces taxes at the 20% rate. So you got to remember to add those back. So a couple of you forgot to do that. Other thing here where people made mistakes, here's where you started to get hung up if you used the wrong ratios. So if you started to use like average inventory or average receivables, you got different numbers than I did. Okay? So what you need to do is you need to use the ratios that are in Appendix B. And here's some of you get screwed up when you calculate the quick ratio. So these are the things that are included in there: cash, marketable securities, accounts receivable divided by current liabilities. So those were the current ratios. And the long-term debt to assets, long-term debt to stockholders' equity, need to add back the current portion of long-term debt. And with the interest coverage ratio, you got to remember to add back the net interest before interest and taxes plus the interest expense. So you got to add back the interest expense in both years to the numerator. So what would happen here is some of you would forget to do those various add backs, and that's why your numbers were off. So if I told you you had wrong numbers in some of the ratios, if you refer to this detailed analysis here, you can see where you made the mistake. Okay, so in conclusion, keep up the good work on the discussion, keep up the good work on the assignments. Remember on the assignments to not have me beat a dead horse again. So the dead horse is, you make sure you answer all the questions that are in the homework briefing. When you compute the ratios, use Appendix B, answer the questions in the order that they're posed, keep up the interaction with the classmates. And if you read something in a classmate, we say, oh my God, I forgot something. Use Charles's example there and redeem yourself. Say, hey, I missed it in the original answer, but you raised a good point here, and I see now that I missed something. To be upfront, acknowledge that you missed something and put it in, will result in you getting more points, not less. Okay, and please be concise and with regard to your analysis. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this little Zoom, little change of pace, and we will see you soon. Adios, hasta luego, au revoir. Be well, everybody.